Christopher Close-Up, a look at the people who are shaping tomorrow's world today. Hello, I'm Edward Blake. Welcome to Christopher Close-Up.
I'm Jean Glenn.
I'm Richard Armstrong.
Since the beginnings of human history, man has been a maker of war and a dreamer of peace. While he has devoted his energy, talents, and resources to the development and use of weapons of self-destruction, he's done comparatively little to discover effective methods for the making and keeping of peace.
Our guest has been actively working for peace for nearly half a century. She's the co-founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, the author of several books, among them Loaves and Fishes, The Long Loneliness, and Meditation. And she's the widely traveled lecturer, Miss Dorothy Day. With her is a former editor of the Catholic Worker newspaper and present executive secretary of the Catholic Peace Fellowship, Mr. Tom Cornell.
Miss Day, how and when did the Catholic Worker Movement begin?
I think there was a war going on at the time it began between China and Japan back in 1933. And it began through the efforts of Peter Morin, a French peasant, who was a former teacher in the Christian Brothers schools in Paris, who felt a call to come to America and be part of really build up a lay apostolate. And he came to me because he read articles that I'd written about the social order and suggested we start the Catholic Worker newspaper.
What was your first reaction when he came with this idea?
My first reaction was that I'd like nothing better than to, I think it's the ambition of everybody who's been in journalism to have their own paper, to start a paper, but I was very dubious about the funds. But he said in the Catholic Church funds were never necessary, you just needed to start. And we found it worked that way.
Well, you began with the Catholic Worker, the newspaper, but this got you into all sorts of other involvements with people.
We began talking about what makes for peace, and that is the teaching in the Gospels, the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, and so on. And to take them literally really meant that you began practicing the works of peace rather than the works of war. And the works of war are the exact opposite of the works of peace. Feeding the hungry when we are destroying crops and sheltering the homeless, when we are destroying villages, wiping out cities. It's all the way through, right down the line, the opposite. And Christ proposed, certainly, that the work of the Christian was the works of mercy. And he laid it down as commands, not counsels, in the 25th chapter of St. Matthew.
There's no better way to get into trouble than to try to make peace, is there?
I always say if you start praying and saying, Lord, what will you have me do? Prayers are answered, and you find yourself doing a lot more than you ever thought you were going to do, getting yourself involved.
Miss Day, as a student, the first thing I heard about the Catholic Worker was the soup kitchen. Could you tell us a little bit about that, how you began these corporal works of mercy, which they really were?
Well, it's if your brother is hungry, you feed him. You don't meet him at the door and say, go be thou filled, or wait for a few weeks and you'll get a welfare check. And you sit him down and feed him. And so that's how the soup kitchen started. As a matter of fact, we didn't start it at all. We were feeding a house full of people, but the soup line started because one of the men who had charge of the clothes room didn't have any more clothes to give out, so he began saying, just come in and have a cup of coffee. And so pretty soon a line formed at the door. And Peter Morin was always in favor of soup, being a good French peasant, so it became a soup line. And we still have the soup line, a couple of hundred people a day coming in. And then, too, our Lord left himself to us as food, bread and wine. And I would say that sitting down and breaking bread with people, the disciples at Emmaus knew him in the breaking of bread, and so it's far easier to see Christ in your brother when you're sitting down and sharing soup with him. You don't any longer see the destitute or the drunk or the disorderly or the unworthy poor.
I think in one of your books you said that in those early days you were surrounded by the offscouring of the earth. Is that what
No, I said we ourselves are the off-scouring.
That's right. Tom, how did you find your way to the Catholic Worker?
Well, I was a student in the early 50s at Fairfield University in Connecticut. We were the silent generation, you know. There wasn't anything going on. And I'd heard the gospel preached, and I believed. And it seemed to me, perhaps this was adolescent arrogance, but I think not entirely, it seemed to me that I'd not really seen the gospel lived. And by accident, at least it seemed that way, I came across the book, The Long Loneliness, by Dorothy, her most autobiographical book, and I read it. And here it was. Here was the gospel being lived. So I lost no time coming down to the Bowery to go to a Friday night meeting and to meet Dorothy. And I sought out a family in Washington, Connecticut, the McCarthys, who had been involved in the Worker in the late 30s. And we talked, we argued. A lot of these ideas seemed very bizarre to me because I came from a very conservative background. I was very skeptical of anything that seemed leftist. The union movement even seemed to me somewhat suspect. But in a very short time, it was all overturned. And my greatest desire was to leave school, to get down to the Bowery. And it was a work of restraint on my part just to stay in school. I stayed in school for 3 more years, got my bachelor's degree, went down to the Worker, and have been involved one way or the other ever since.
Well, Stay, we've, since the Catholic Worker began, besides the Chinese-Japanese War, we've had the Spanish Civil War, the Italian-Ethiopian War, World War II, Korea, plus violence at home at Watts, Newark, Attica. Do you think mankind will ever learn nonviolence?
And now the Indo-China War,
The Indochina
the
War.
longest war in our history. I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge, it doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities. And I think that today there is certainly the beginnings of a movement of nonviolence all over the world. Of course, the teachings of Gandhi in India and Vinoba Bhave today, his successor, and then the work here in our country of the Martin Luther King movement and the Cesar Chavez movement in the West Coast. They wouldn't like to have it labeled in that way, but I think that their names are so familiar to people, both in the union field, which interests me very much because I think that it's beginning to work from the bottom up instead of from the top down. Everybody looks to the state and looks to the state for funding and looks to the state to keep our schools going, always turning to the state. And the state isn't supposed to be functioning in this way. Martin Buber says the state should be a community of communities. And certainly the popes have said that the state should never do what smaller bodies can do. And here when unions and credit unions and cooperatives are the basis of man's mutual aid and working together, it's an entirely different political point of view, and it makes for peace.
Ms. Day, you sound very hopeful. Besides the Cesar Chavez and the others you've mentioned, are there places right now in this country where peace is actively being taught?
There is a tremendous growth in the peace movement, certainly in this country. And it makes me very happy to think of it being taught in high schools. And I think the Christopher program is reaching out, and by their publications especially, to reach people where they can see and read and think. And I think that the Catholic Peace Fellowship, with groups all over the country, and the constant emphasis on the need for voluntary poverty and the works of mercy as a basis of the peace movement, and learning to put off the old man and put on the new, put off the old man and put on Christ, as St. Paul said. These things are are taking hold, you might say, all through the young. I mean, the desire is there to grow spiritually and to see how much they can do without, to see how much they can go ahead to change the system by each one playing his part in this way, a great sense of personal responsibility and the importance of it. It's what Mounier over in France called the personalist and communitarian revolution, and Peter Morin talked to us about that.
It certainly is a revolution, because now we're not talking about social structures. I think we're talking about ourselves. How much are we willing to put ourselves into living out of the gospel? And that's a lot harder than simply getting a job or designing some kind of utopia, because it begins here and now. I wonder, Tom, could you mention some other people who have been influenced by the Catholic worker movement, the idea?
Well, there are so many. I think it was Ed Wilcock who said that there are very few people who take all of the Catholic worker philosophy as their own, but there are even fewer who haven't been touched in some way. There are organizations like the Catholic Peace Fellowship, which is a direct offshoot of the worker. There's the Association of Catholic Trade Unionists. There's the American Pox Association, doing work in peace education and peace action. There are others. We don't want to claim a kind of parental responsibility or credit for a lot of the things that go on, but I can see Catholic worker ideas and attitudes and lifestyles, if you will, going through so much of everything that's any good in this country, and not just in the Catholic sector of the community, but throughout.
Yeah. Well, because I think it goes back to the gospel.
It's fundamental radicalism. That's the real kind of radicalism, getting right down to the real roots.
Stay, we have about 30 seconds left. Give us 30 seconds on turning the other cheek.
Well, not in a provocative fashion.
But the idea, I mean, of nonviolence as a positive way of achieving one's goals.
Well, the last words of Jesus were the last command was to lay down our lives for our brother, not to take life. And that would mean certainly taking what comes without looking for our help in weapons or the arms race.
Thank you very much, Dorothy Day and Tom Cornell. And now here is Edward Blake.
Ironology is a big word, but it's one that hopefully we'll hear more often. It's the name increasingly being given for the serious, systematic study of peace. In the United States alone, there are between 80 and 100 courses on peace already being taught. To find out more about peace studies and how it can be brought to your campuses, write for your copy of the special Christopher booklet called Ironology. Send your name, address, and zip code to the Christophers, New York, 10017. We'll be happy to send it to you free of charge.
We're speaking with Dorothy Day, founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, and Tom Cornell of the Catholic Peace Fellowship.
May I ask, nonviolence and peace-related activities can arouse such terrible resentment and hostility. Why is that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, why? Maybe the way it's presented.
Well, may I be personal and say that, for instance, in my living room not long ago, there was a young man who wanted to really put into practice the voluntary poverty idea with his wife and 3 children. And I was amazed that among the neighbors who knew him, suddenly there was a terrible amount of hostility in the room. And I've seen this happen in many incidents, and I wonder if...
Oh, well, I think that in a case like that, and probably in the case of nonviolence, it's almost a holier-than-thou attitude, you know.
I see.
That people feel a resentment that anybody should presume to think that they are capable of bucking the system. After all, in the system, people have to dress and house themselves, and even their address is important, and so on. So when you're thinking in those terms, why, you're setting yourself up as being, well, following another another star. And in a way, there is an arrogance about it. Almost might better not say a word about it and just sort of get into it, you know, because you soon realize how much you fail in it and how you are compromising over and over again, and that you do the best you can, and some can take more than others, some can go further than others. But it almost seems like a judgment of others, you see. And so I suppose that's one of the reasons. There's a very good reason for it. I think that anybody who arouses hostility really ought to settle down and try to figure out why, you know.
That's not really being a peacemaker, is it?
The word conciliate is sort of a bad word, but to reconcile isn't a bad word. Fellowship of reconciliation, you know. But the bishops in Spain recently apologized that during the Spanish Civil War, they apologized to their people because during the Spanish Civil War they had not acted as agents of reconciliation between brothers who were warring together. So I say, you have to conciliate. You have to go ahead and be extremely humble about how little you can do, too. Make up your mind to it.
But I think another cause of the hostility is people feel that the underpinnings of their security are being attacked. And if you presume to try to live the nonviolent way, you live in a condition of risk. That's that's the name of the game.
But in a way also everybody holds each other up, and they think, well, here you are married with 3 children. What right have you got to go ahead? Who is going to support you? How much are you going to depend on others and family, or throw yourself on the free lunch program of the schools or Medicaid, and then have everybody have to pay increased taxes and so on? I don't know. Voluntary poverty is an extremely radical weapon. And after all, we live off of people, even if we do wear the clothes that come in and have no salaries and all that. Who's supporting us? People who are in the system. So what right have we got to go ahead and, I mean, I think you have to be extremely careful the way you try to approach these. They can be suggested, they can be tentatively worked out, but it's a little by little affair.
It seems if we can, any of us avoid this kind of strident enunciation,
Yes.
which is to say, look
Oh,
at me,
yes.
I'm the one who's doing the right thing.
Or criticisms. Peter Morin, our holy founder, he always said,
Blessed memory.
be what you want the other fellow to be. And he said to be announcers rather than denouncers and things like that, things that stuck in your head. But whenever you started getting very critical of somebody, you could go ahead and try to be what you wanted him to be and forget about it.
This element of risk that you were talking about before the program, when we were talking with Tom, when you would like to lead a nonviolent life, and say you have little children who live in the city, and you want to teach them this nonviolence right away. If you're in a neighborhood where children are mugged or carry guns, or even in country sides where maybe the roads might be safe for the children, you're running a certain amount of risk. Would you comment further on that?
Well, I think fear is one of the most dangerous things, and to get over fears and teach your children not to have fears. I think that's the kind of thing that overcomes, but it's very hard, naturally. And then also to quit criticizing and always being so, well, you end up by having a chip on your shoulder. You start something, you get clobbered, partly it's your own fault. Children do have a hard time, but you do what you can, go as far as you can. And after all, they all have guardian angels, and I think that we need to stress that, and also have some faith that there is this protection and overall care. Our Father hath care of us, and so on. I mean, it's you have to overcome fear, because fear is what makes the police trigger happy. There's a terrible fear of the whites for the blacks, and the blacks rightly. When you think of Attica, and when you think of the men being held as hostages with knives at their throats, And then all the atrocity stories were proven to be untrue, but the threat was still there, of course. But you can't help but think how the blacks have had this threat hung over them about what would happen to them. And there's been the lynching parties in our history. And they also were full of rhetoric and the threat. But you look at the faces of these men when they were talking with the man in charge, who was the final authority over all the guards, and you see what they were demanding. They were demanding that they be treated as human beings, that their religious attitude should be respected. Our priests go in pomp and circumstance. Our Holy Father goes in pomp and circumstance. They worship the Lord in holy attire. And if the Muslims can't go ahead and dress as they see fit and fast from pork and have their religious rights respected instead of being made fun of, we might better make fun of the Masons and the Elks and all the other different organizations amongst the whites. But I mean, these attitudes of contempt, I think essentially to have respect for everyone, to expect from them a response, and not to greet them with fear, not to greet them with this hatred, suspicion, anger, contempt, and lack of brotherly love. That's a quotation from The Imitation. But it's, I think it has to be from childhood on. And to give in a lot.
Tom, tell us something about the Catholic Peace Fellowship.
Well, as I said, it's a direct offshoot of the Catholic Worker Movement, but it's part of a larger group called the Fellowship of Reconciliation, which dates back to World War I, first founded in England and then in this country.
It was founded by a Presbyterian minister?
No, originally with Anglican and Lutheran pastors who wanted to keep a line of communication open between the two believing communities at war in Germany and England, and then later here. We have, I think, 14 religious affiliates to the FOR, including Jewish, Orthodox, and humanist groups. We started up the Catholic Peace Fellowship in 1964 with the help of Thomas Merton and Father Daniel and Father Philip Berrigan. And we've been involved in peace education and action, getting into schools, high schools, and colleges, circulating speakers from all over the world, and literature of our own design, and your own literature, which we find very helpful and less expensive than we could produce ourselves. Sponsoring demonstrations from every kind of activity, from very conventional kinds of activity to very unconventional activities, which sometimes land us in jail, but more often in classrooms.
Well, we tend, I'd say, to work within the establishment, and Christopher is trying to persuade people who have power to use it more responsibly. I would think of both of you as working somewhat outside of it. Do you find any irreconcilable differences there?
Not at all. In fact, when people say we work outside the system, I can understand and appreciate that, but I don't really feel any investment, in that term. If I were to describe the way I would like to operate, it would be with 1 foot in and 1 foot out, so that we don't rely upon any authorization from the hierarchy or from any bishop or from anybody at all. You don't have to have a patent to practice the works of mercy. You don't have to have a patent to proclaim the gospel of peace.
You need a lot of courage, that's all.
Well, we find that we have more and more call upon our services from various dioceses. 4 or 5 years ago, 7 years ago when we started, all the draft counseling was done in our office. Any draft counseling that was done in the Catholic field, I don't know of any of it that was done outside of the Catholic Worker and the Catholic Peace Fellowship. Now, we have priests trained by the Catholic Peace Fellowship in many dioceses, and they are doing the job, and that's where the job should have been in the first place. But if sometimes we can give a nudge, we'll give the nudge. If we can work with bishops and their commissions and priests and parishes, fine, all the better.
Ms. Day, we have about a minute left. what do you think is the most important thing our audience can do to make nonviolence a way of life?
Well, always begin with themselves, I think. And it's a question of thought, word, and deed, not to be thinking resentful or violent or antagonistic thoughts. I mean, if all men are brothers, we can't help but make judgments, of course, but in a way, Christ said not to judge, so that we do violence in thinking and in speech and so on. That begins there. And I think that wherever we are, whether in the home or children, respecting one another and respecting others, I don't know, you have to begin right at the very bottom level. And it's not being 1 foot in the system or 1 foot out of it or being out of the system at all. I think we're in the system, all of us. And we have to remember that we are all members one of another.
Thank you so much, Dorothy Day and Tom Cornell. Now here's Edward Blake.
I'd like to remind you of that big word again, iranology. It means peace studies. One of the reasons that achieving peace has been such a struggle is that we know so little about it. Scholarly research on violence and aggression as it relates to peace and war is being done, but much more remains to be done. Find out how you can play your part in promoting peace. Send for your free copy of Iranology. Write your name, address, and zip code on a postcard to the Christophers, New York, New York, 10017. We'll be happy to send it to you free of charge.
In the Epistle of St. James, the apostle says that the fruit of justice is sown in peace by those who make peace. The Chinese character for peace is actually made up of 3 characters. One is Ping, which means equality, where no one dominates over another. The second character in peace shows a woman under a roof, because where there is domestic tranquility, there is peace. And the third part of the Chinese character for peace shows a mouth and grain. Where there is love, there will be peace. Work for peace and justice. Thank you, and God bless you.
We hope these visits with people who are helping to change the world serve as a reminder that each one of us has a unique contribution to make. There is something you can do today. It's better to light one candle than to curse the darkness.